They thought it was just a tragic accident. They thought the little girl was gone, and the loyal police dog beside her was simply grieving. But when Ranger refused to leave her coffin and growled at a man no one suspected, the truth began to rise from the shadows. A hidden warning in a child's drawing, a secret buried behind the police station, a heartbeat that should have been silent, suddenly returning. This is the story of a dog who saw what no one else dared to see, and the miracle he refused to give up on. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. A cold drizzle tapped softly on the church roof, the kind that lingered like an old memory refusing to leave. The hall smelled of worn wood and lilies, an old American church where the benches creaked under the weight of grief. People spoke in whispers, if they spoke at all. And in the middle of that silence lay a small white coffin, too small for any room, too heavy for any heart. Officer Ryan Hale stood near the back, hands clasped, eyes lowered. He was 34, tall, shoulders slightly bent from years of carrying more than he said. His brown hair, cut short, framed a tired face, clean-shaven but marked by nights without sleep. The navy tactical shirt he wore felt strangely out of place among black suits and Sunday dresses. He watched the doorway, not for people, but for the dog he knew would come. Ranger, 5-year-old German Shepherd, black and tan coat still damp from the rain, walked in with slow, measured steps. Not defiant, not afraid, just certain. The kind of certainty only animals carry when they've loved without conditions. Ranger approached the coffin, lowered his head, and with a soft grunt climbed in beside the girl. Emily Carter, 5 years old. Blonde curls, a pink dress folded neatly over stillness. The dog curled around her as though finishing a promise he had made long before this day. The room froze. Breath held. Time held. When someone moved closer, Ranger lifted his head. Not with anger, just warning. A single low growl, the kind that came from a place deeper than instinct. Ryan stepped forward, speaking gently, his voice low, roughened by the kind of sorrow men keep to themselves. "Easy, boy. I'm here." But Ranger didn't look at him. His dark eyes stayed fixed on the doorway, watching Officer Mark Collins. Collins stood stiffly, hands tucked into his gray uniform pants, shoulders narrow beneath his shirt. 38. Pale. Thin from stress or guilt, or both. His tie hung just a little crooked, and his eyes, restless, shifting, avoided the coffin as though it were a mirror he feared. Ranger's growl deepened, chest trembling. People whispered, wondering if the dog had lost his training. But Ryan knew better. Dogs forget commands, not truths. Collins cleared his throat, a thin, fragile sound. "Why's he looking at me like that?" he muttered. No one answered. Even the priest fell silent. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere far away, as if remembering something the rest of them had missed. And suddenly, Ryan felt it, the wrongness in the room. Not loud, not obvious, just a quiet thread pulling at the edges of everything. Ranger lowered his head again onto Emily's chest, nudging her gently, as if urging her to breathe, urging someone, anyone, to listen. Ryan watched the dog's ribs rise and fall, watched the way Ranger shielded the girl with his entire body, as though she were still warm, still reachable, still his. And in that stillness, Ryan felt a memory stir. Emily's soft voice, calling Ranger her brave friend, the way the dog leaned into her touch as if it eased something inside him too. The mourners shifted uneasily. A grandmother wiped her eyes. A father held his breath. A child in the third pew began to cry, without knowing why. Ranger lifted his gaze once more toward Collins, and in that moment, Ryan understood. This wasn't confusion. This was accusation, quiet, steady, and unwavering. He placed a hand on the edge of the coffin, letting the wood steady him. "Something's wrong here," he whispered, though no one had asked. And Ranger, as if hearing a truth finally spoken aloud, exhaled a long, trembling breath and closed his eyes. For a moment, the rain eased outside. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. And in that pause, Ryan felt a promise take shape, one he hadn't planned, but one he could no longer walk away from. Morning light drifted through thin clouds, soft as breath on glass, touching the world without waking it fully. Ryan Hale remembered that kind of morning well. It had a gentleness that made a man pause, made him think about the things he should have held closer. He stood on the porch of a small suburban home, the paint chipped in places, the wood smelling of sun and old rain. It was months before the funeral, before the silence, and a little girl with pale curls leaned over the fence, watching the street with the kind of patience only children possess. Emily Carter, 5 years old, fair-skinned, wearing a pink cotton dress that fluttered in the breeze. She had the quiet air of a child who spent more time listening than speaking, her blue eyes carrying both shyness and hope. Ranger walked beside Ryan then, tail low, steps light. A 5-year-old German shepherd with a proud build and a coat catching every bit of sunlight. When he saw her, something in him softened. He trotted ahead, ears perked, letting Emily press her tiny hands into his fur. She offered him crumbs from her pocket, crumbs she collected just for him. Ryan stood nearby, leaning against the wooden fence, feeling a warmth he rarely allowed himself, the kind that reminded him of life before loss, before duty hardened the softer parts of him. He remembered the day before the accident with painful clarity. Emily had been in the yard, sitting cross-legged on the porch steps, her small fingers stained with pencil smudges. Her mother, Mrs. Carter, a 33-year-old woman with a kind face prematurely lined by worry, stepped outside carrying a basket of laundry. She wore a pastel knit cardigan, her hair pulled back loosely. When she spoke, her voice had the soft rasp of someone who had cried more than she'd admit. Emily tugged at her sleeve. "Mom, look," she said, holding up a drawing. A child's sketch, full of uneven lines and colors. Ranger stood in the foreground, chest out, head high. Behind him was a black SUV, its shape unmistakable even in childish form. And farther in the corner, drawn almost like a shadow, was a tall figure, blurry, faceless, dark. Mrs. Carter smiled gently, not understanding. "You drew Ranger again?" she asked. Emily nodded, her curls brushing her cheeks. She said nothing more. Children sometimes carry truths adults are too busy to see. At the time, no one realized she had been trying to show them something, trying, in her small way, to speak before fear stole her words. On the night Ryan reviewed the drawing, after the funeral, after the stillness settled into his bones, he couldn't shake the feeling of warning woven into those simple strokes. And when Collins stepped into the interrogation room days later, Ryan saw the same unease Ranger had sensed at the church. Mark Collins, 38, tall but thin, wearing a gray police shirt that hung too loose on his frame. His short brown hair looked unkempt, as if sleep no longer visited him. There was a tremor in his voice when he spoke, low and tired. "I didn't mean for any of this." Ranger growled then, a low, vibrating sound that came from deep in his chest. Not rage, recognition. Collins flinched, lowering his eyes like a man who had been running from himself far too long. Ryan studied him carefully. He saw guilt, yes, but beneath it, something else. Fear. A kind that didn't belong to a criminal, but to someone trapped in a shadow larger than himself. Ryan felt a strange ache, a mixture of anger and reluctant understanding. He had known men like Collins before, men who weren't evil, only weak, men who listened to the wrong voice at the wrong time. Later that evening, Ryan sat alone in his truck, the drawing in his hands. He ran a thumb over the dark figure in the corner, the SUV behind Emily. Ranger rested his head on Ryan's knee, warm and steady, as if reminding him he wasn't alone in knowing something was wrong. "We should have listened sooner," Ryan whispered. The wind outside answered with a soft, passing sigh. And somewhere in that quiet, he made himself a promise to honor the trust of a child who had tried to speak and a dog who refused to forget. The wind carried a thin chill that night, brushing against windows like a quiet reminder that some stories refuse to rest. Ryan Hale felt it first, a shift in the air, subtle but certain, long before he understood what Ranger meant to do. He had been sitting in a wooden chair near the front of the empty chapel, elbows on his knees, the faint scent of extinguished candles lingering around him. Ranger lay beside the coffin, his black and tan coat dull under the low light. 2 days without food, 2 days without closing his eyes for more than a moment. The dog rose suddenly, joints stiff, breath slow but purposeful. Ryan stood as if pulled by an invisible thread. "You ready, boy?" he whispered, though he knew this wasn't readiness. This was calling. Ranger pushed his head once more against the small white coffin, one soft touch like farewell or apology, then trotted to the door with an urgency that did not belong to grief. Ryan followed. Outside, rain misted the pavement, turning streetlights into blurred halos. Detective Laura Briggs waited near her car, arms crossed beneath her beige trench coat. She was 42, sharp-eyed, composed, but carrying the fatigue of someone who had spent too many nights staring at evidence that refused to speak. Her voice, low and steady, broke the silence. "Where's he going?" Ryan shook his head. "Somewhere he's been holding inside him since that night." They didn't question him. Not this time. Some instincts outrun logic. Ranger led them through the quiet city, paws splashing lightly against puddles, breath forming ghosts in the cold night air. He moved with the single-mindedness of memory, turning corners with small hesitations, as if retracing a path imprinted the moment Emily's heartbeat slipped away from him. The houses grew smaller, older, until they reached the Carter home, a modest place with peeling paint and a porch light that flickered like a tired pulse. Ranger pushed through the side gate, nails clicking against concrete, and descended into the basement where the air smelled of dust and old summers. He stopped beneath a shelf where the family security camera sat. A guttural growl rose from deep within him, vibrating through the narrow room. Ryan approached the monitor, wiping away a thin layer of grime. The footage loaded with a faint hum. At first, only ordinary scenes. Emily playing, sunlight over the lawn, Ranger in the distance on a different day. But then, Ryan felt his chest tighten. The night of the accident flickered into view. Emily at the edge of the driveway. A sudden jolt, her small form pulled back sharply by an unseen force. Laura leaned closer. She didn't run into that street. Her voice cracked on the last word, and then the SUV appeared, black, approaching slowly, too slowly. Behind the wheel, Mark Collins. But Ranger wasn't watching the screen. His gaze locked on the corner of the video where a tall shadow stood. A man, half hidden by the frame. Ranger's fur rose along his spine. He barked, sharp and certain. Ryan froze the frame. The figure was unmistakable in stature alone, broad shoulders, a posture used to authority. Assistant Chief Thomas Avery. Laura exhaled, a sound half anger, half heartbreak. My God, he was there. Collins confessed hours later, his face ashen, his voice thin as worn thread. He sat in the interrogation room under a failing fluorescent light that made the lines on his face deeper, older. "I didn't want any of it," he muttered. "He threatened my family. Said if I didn't follow him, I'd lose everything." His fingers shook as he pulled at the seam of his uniform pants. "I only meant to scare the mother, not hurt the girl." Ryan watched him, jaw tight. In Collins's trembling hands, Ryan saw not innocence, but the tragedy of a weak man bending under the weight of a stronger evil. Yet even then there was a flicker, regret trying to surface through layers of fear. Ranger paced outside the glass, his nails clicking softly like a metronome for a truth long overdue. Ryan placed a hand on the dog's back. It felt warm, steady, alive. "We know now," he whispered, "and we won't stop." In that quiet room, as the rain softened outside, something shifted inside Ryan. A certainty, a vow that came not from anger, but from the need to honor a little girl who had drawn the truth before she could speak it, and a dog who had carried that truth in silence until the night it finally found breath. A thin moon hung low, its pale light brushing the ground like a hand afraid to wake the earth. Ryan Hale walked with his shoulders drawn tight, following Ranger's steady pace through the narrow alley behind the police station. The night smelled of old concrete and wet cedar, a scent he associated with forgotten places, spots where truth settled like dust. Detective Laura Briggs kept close beside him, her beige trench coat darkened at the cuffs from the damp air. She looked older under the street lamp glow, not by years, but by the weight of things she had refused to ignore. Her voice was quiet. "You sure he's leading us right?" Ryan didn't answer. Ranger, 5 years old, proud-backed, black and tan fur rippling, was already yards ahead. The dog walked with a limp tonight, a faint echo of the strain he carried since losing Emily. His breathing formed soft clouds, disappearing almost as soon as they were born. He paused at a rusted metal door, its hinges bent, the paint peeling like dead bark. He pressed his nose to the bottom seam, inhaled, then let out a sharp bark. Not angry, just certain. The kind of certainty Ryan had learned not to question. He pushed the door open. The smell of dust and cold metal greeted them like an old, unwelcome memory. Inside was a narrow shed with wooden beams that sagged like tired shoulders. The flashlight beam drifted across the floor, then stopped. A small pink backpack lay abandoned, one strap torn. Beside it, tiny shoes coated in dried mud. A child's cotton handkerchief stained with brown red. Laura drew in a breath, one hand rising to her mouth. "Dear God," she whispered. Ryan knelt, lifting the backpack gently, the fabric soft against his palms. He could almost see Emily clutching it with small, careful fingers. He placed it down and followed Ranger farther inside. The dog's body stiffened, his growl grew low, pulsing from deep in his chest as he stared at a metal box shoved behind a broken chair. Ryan opened it. A jagged piece of pink fabric lay inside, torn, familiar. Ranger whined, nudging it, recognizing the scent that had clung to him since the night everything changed. On the wall were photographs, grainy shots of Emily near her home, near her school, near places a child should never be watched so closely. Laura studied them with a trembling jaw. "This wasn't fear," she murmured. "This was control." She traced a handwritten note pinned beneath the photos. Her mother must stay silent. And then Ryan saw something glinting under the flashlight's edge, a brass lapel pin with initials etched into it. T.A. He swallowed hard. The room felt colder. Shadows deepened along the walls. The door behind them creaked. A man stepped in, tall, shoulders broad, beneath a Navy command uniform. His silver hair was combed perfectly, his clean-shaven face rigid. Assistant Chief Thomas Avery carried the stillness of someone who believed himself untouchable. His voice was smooth, too smooth. "You shouldn't be here," he said. He didn't look at the photos. He didn't look at the backpack. Only at them, like they were the ones trespassing into something sacred. Laura straightened. "You were supposed to protect her." Avery's eyes flicked with the faintest annoyance. Collins was weak. He panicked. My intent was only to send a message. Ryan felt something dark coil in his chest. "You terrorized a child." Avery shrugged once. Her mother asked for it. Ranger barked, sudden and sharp, the sound cracking through the room like a breaking bone. Avery stepped back, hand twitching toward the door. Then he ran. Ryan barely registered the movement before Ranger lunged out after him, paws pounding the dirt. Avery reached the edge of the storage lot when his boot struck a patch of gravel. Ranger collided with him, hard. Avery swung a leg wildly, his heel connecting with Ranger's ribs. The dog fell, a pained yelp slicing through the night. Ryan's heart stopped, but Ranger pushed up again, trembling, one leg dragging. He leapt, using the last of his strength, crashing into Avery's chest and forcing him to the ground. Ryan caught up, breath ragged, and pulled cuffs from his belt. Avery struggled, face twisted with disbelief. But the fight was gone. When the metal clicked shut around his wrists, the night finally went quiet. Ranger collapsed beside Ryan, sides heaving. Ryan placed a hand on the dog's neck, feeling warmth beneath his trembling fur. "You did it, boy," he whispered. The moon hung a little higher now, the light softer, kinder. And in that stillness, Ryan felt something settle inside him. An ache, yes, but also a truth. Justice may come late, but sometimes it arrives on four legs, breathing hard, determined not to let darkness win. Morning drifted into the world softly, like someone lifting a curtain without meaning to wake the room. Ryan Hale stood in the hospital corridor, the white walls glowing faintly under the early light. His clothes were still damp from the night rain, and there was dirt on his sleeves from the struggle with Avery. He didn't bother brushing it off. Ranger stood beside him, limping, his black and tan fur ruffled and matted near the bandaged leg. The dog's breathing was shallow but steady, and his calm eyes held a strange mix of pain and purpose. Detective Laura Briggs stepped off the elevator moments later, her voice low, raspy from exhaustion. "Ryan, the doctors need you both inside. Now." The air changed. It thinned, sharpened, like the world was holding its breath. A nurse, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a gentle posture, opened the ICU door with both hands. "She's responding," she whispered. "Your dog should come in." Ryan felt his knees weaken. For the first time in days, hope did not hurt. Inside the room, tiny machines blinked softly, their lights rising and falling like distant stars. Emily lay on the bed, her small frame wrapped in warm blankets, her golden curls spread across the pillow like sunlight that had refused to leave her. Her breathing was faint, irregular, as if her body was still deciding whether it belonged to this world. Her mother sat at the bedside, hands trembling over Emily's arm. Mrs. Carter looked older than her 33 years this morning, eyes swollen, posture collapsed inward. But when she saw Ranger, a fragile smile broke through. "He never gave up on her," she whispered. Ryan approached slowly, feeling something stir inside him, a mixture of fear, gratitude, and the ache of someone witnessing a miracle he didn't dare ask for. Ranger stepped forward, dragging his injured leg with a soft scrape against the floor. He lifted his head, leaning it gently against Emily's unmoving hand. For a heartbeat, nothing changed. And then the smallest sound, a sharp inhale, like a child waking from a long dream. Emily's fingers curled, her chest shuddered, a whimper slipped out, fragile as a raindrop. Then she cried. It wasn't loud, it wasn't even a full sob, but it was the first time since she had opened her eyes again that any emotion broke through the haze. Tears rolled down her cheeks, her lips trembling as she turned her head ever so slightly toward the dog. "Ranger," her voice cracked like thin ice. "You came back." Ryan felt his eyes blur. Years of holding himself together broke in a single breath. He placed a hand over his mouth, trying, but failing, to steady himself. Ranger whined softly, nudging her arm, pressing closer, his body trembling under the strain of pain and relief. Emily reached up, weak and shaking, and wrapped her arms around his neck. She cried harder when she noticed his bandaged leg. "You're hurt," she whispered. "Because of me." Ryan knelt beside them. "No, sweetheart," he said quietly. "He did it because he loves you." Laura Briggs, standing in the doorway, wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand. She had spent her life dissecting evidence, chasing truth through dark corners, but in this room, witnessing loyalty strong enough to drag one life back to another, she felt something far simpler: grace. The rest of the morning unfolded slowly, full of quiet voices and held hands. Collins gave a complete confession, every detail spilling out like a burden finally too heavy to keep. He spoke of Avery's threats, his manipulation, the fear that had corroded his judgment until he mistook obedience for survival. Avery was already in federal custody, facing charges that reached far beyond that night. Justice would not undo the harm, but it would at least shine light on the shadows where he once hid. Emily's recovery moved gently, like watching a flower try again after frost. And Ranger, though limping, though stitched and sore, refused to leave her bedside. Ryan often sat with them, one hand resting on Ranger's back, one hand on the rail of Emily's bed. He spoke little. He didn't need to. Some truths are better carried in silence. In time, Emily would smile again. Ranger would walk without limping. And Ryan, weathered, steady, quietly changed, would remember this morning as the moment he chose to believe in miracles not shaped by luck, but by love that refuses to surrender. In moments like these, we're reminded that even in our quietest years, when illness weighs heavy, when the house feels too still, when loneliness sits beside us, love can still find its way back. Ranger and Emily's story is a small light for anyone fighting silent battles. If it touched your heart, please share it, leave a comment, and subscribe so you never walk this road alone. And may God watch over you, keep your body steady, your spirit gentle, and your days filled with people who remind you that you are still deeply needed.